live?
I think Jan's there and Jim's there.
Oh, okay.
And I'm joined by Leah and Trent, of course.
I couldn't hear very well. Let me turn this up.
I don't know if you can tell if I'm here. This is Heston.
Hi.
We have you, yeah?
Okay.
I think Jan's there and Jim's there.
Okay.
And I'm joined by Leah and Trent, of course. Ooh, you must do that.
That was a long echo.
Oh, actually, that is delayed. My head was down.
Do you have
I'm
a
gonna
note?
mute the audio. The audio's not very good. I don't know why. Let's see.
So once we start the meeting, I'll go and open up the YouTube link on my other computer just to make sure the audio is still coming through.
Great,
And I'll yell in to just let you know we're good to go.
great. Thank you very
So
much.
Tara, we're live and ready to roll.
Okay, good. So it's 7:01 p.m. and I'll call this meeting of the Old Saybrook Board of Education to order. And I will start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And we are going to look into, I think it was your suggestion, Karina, about trying to have a flag come up that we pledge allegiance to as opposed to.
We were trying to get fancy and find one that also did sign language like they have at the middle school every day, but it was too busy for this thing. So we went back to square one. We're working on it.
Yeah, still. All right, good. Thank you. So it's Board of Education Appreciation Month. I'm sorry that we're not in the board.
Donuts. We need donuts, cookies, brownies.
Oh, chocolate. I have mine from last year.
So I am sorry that you're not here with us tonight. I'm actually kind of glad that Jim is here because he gets to be your proxy for all of you. As you know, I think I speak collectively for the administrative team and the entire school district when I say that we really appreciate and admire our Board of Education. You are, I always like to remind the community, volunteers on a very busy board, and all of you have many other things in your lives, and yet you always make time for this school district, this superintendent, this administrative team, and all of the students. And I hope that Old Saybrook, the community of Old Saybrook, knows just how very fortunate they are that you are all here. Whether you've been on this board for 30 years or a few months, your work is greatly appreciated. And during Board of Education Appreciation Month, we always just like to take a moment to thank you for what you do for us all collectively. And every year we like to honor you. We have fallen into the habit of honoring you with some student-created work. And this year, I'm handing Jim, as your proxy, his gift this year from Goodwin School, from Mrs. Bernardson's class. We have the most amazing renditions of lighthouses by different second grade students. I'm gonna hold a couple of them up so that you can see them, and they come with envelopes, so they are beautiful note cards, and you can write some lovely notes in there. I just want to show you a few. They're so good that we all stopped what we were doing just to take a look at them and share them here at central office. And so it's appropriate because it's our lighthouse, it's our community, it's our school district, and these are for you, and we will make sure that we get them to you. And we thank you again for everything.
Oh, that's awesome.
I'd like to thank you, Jan, for the lovely gift and express our congratulations to the second grade.
We will do that. We will
That's
do that.
awesome. Thanks for accepting those for us, Jim. That's awesome. Thank you. So I looked and I don't see any attendees that would be part of the audience of citizens unless there's somebody there in public or in person.
There is not.
Tara,
Yes.
does the note cards have made by Goodwin School on the back? Because I usually send a lot of notes. I'm curious.
I don't know. I haven't seen them.
The note cards on the front say the first name of the child, the grade, and then it says Kathleen E. Goodwin Elementary School.
Nice. Thank you so much.
Beautiful.
Thanks. All right, so that brings us to our reports from our Student Board of Education representatives. So I will hand it off to them.
Hi, everybody. So upcoming updates, we have a blood drive happening on March 25th. So that's this Friday. That's great. We have some seniors that did it a few months ago, and so I think they are helping support this one. We also have resume workshops that are starting this week of March, and they're going through the middle of April 14th. And anyone can sign up, and the students can also receive college and career readiness credit for participating. I think it is aimed more at juniors and seniors who are putting resumes together or college applications, but anyone can do it. The spring musical just happened. We had 3 shows of Sister Act on the 17th, 18th, and 19th, and that was the spring musical and the last show of this school year. That was wonderful. We raised a lot of money, and it was just a great experience. Masks are now optional, which you all know, and the students are definitely loving that. And we had some COVID test kits handed out the other day to help support COVID safety.
All right, good to see everybody. Moving on to the sports report. So I talked about girls basketball at the last meeting. So they're finished a couple weeks ago, but the boys basketball finished their season. I think it was about 2 weeks ago now. They lost against First Achievement in the second round of the state's tournament. So their season is now over, and their regular season record was 14-6. The track and field, the girls 4x2 relay competed in the nationals, which was pretty impressive. And track's over, and now we're moving on to spring sports. So those started this week. I'm not sure if the sports started last week, but I know track and field started this Monday. So they're officially started. And I will be getting the captain's information out next meeting and get some of the schedules together as well. And also in our document, we included, there was a full snapshot of the winter sports. I'm not sure if it's included in the Board of Ed document, but it's here if you ever want to take a look at that. So that's it.
Thank you, Matthew and McKenna. Any questions from the board for our student reps? Eileen, go ahead.
Yes, I actually found the hand down at the bottom, but I'm always used to raising my hand. Anyway, we're learning. I just wanted to say that the Sister Act was absolutely fabulous. Terrific, very talented individuals at the high school. I thought, are they really in high school? I thought it was really fabulous. I also appreciated the social distancing that the administration, took care to develop, which wasn't that easy, I'm sure, to do. And hopefully they had people that could participate virtually. I don't know how many participated virtually. Does anybody know?
Thank you.
Yes.
Matt in the live stream, so
Yeah.
he was all about that.
Yeah, so I directed the live stream. I did all the live cuts, and I operated a camera along with Parker Cook. So we had 3 cameras going. That was pretty cool. We had so it was 84 tickets sold total. And we figured maybe around 3 to 4 people could watch it at once on average, because you could watch it as like a family on a TV. So we got close to maybe 200 people watching at home. That's probably a little bit of a stretch, but that was like kind of the estimated. But it allowed us to get like a little bit of a revenue boost too. So and it was especially good even without COVID. It's good because people who like don't live near here can still watch it, which is fantastic. So yeah.
Fantastic on your competence to be able to provide that as a student.
Thank you
so much. I just had one other follow-up question, Tara. Is that the resume workshops or completion of applications, is that provided by the guidance department or English department?
That's college and career readiness. So Ms. Fawcett, Ms. Using, that kind of area that they handle.
Okay, thanks so much.
Thanks. Any other questions or comments for our student reps?
I think spring sports, Mr. Wright, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it starts this Friday, Saturday, right?
Practice has actually started last Friday, Saturday. So they're in full swing this week. No pun intended.
Games this week, right?
Games begin, I think, the first week of April. Or there's some scrimmages set. I think there's a scrimmage the end of this week.
Yeah,
baseball scrimmage.
I saw that on the Mr. Saunders sends out a regular announcement to us, and we find out about the home games.
Great. Thank you. All right. Well, thank you both very much. I think we've got another topic for you guys coming up later in the program, so stay tuned. Up next is correspondence. Karen?
We do have two pieces of correspondence that are both listed in the board notebook for everybody to read. The first one is a parent email regarding suicide prevention procedures at the high school. And I do know that Jan and the administrators are addressing that question. And the second piece is the issue, an issue of Sabias, which is the staff English learners newsletter that came out. And that's it.
Excellent. Thanks, Karen.
Welcome.
Questions or comments? Eileen? Oh, I can't hear you, Eileen.
Now you can. So
Now
maybe,
you can.
maybe
Okay,
the question, I know the letter, and maybe Jan can answer it. Maybe this policy, because it's referenced, can be reviewed. Jan, maybe when you and I meet ahead of time and see if that's something that should come to the policy committee. I didn't even know we had one.
It's not. I think the word policy is used in the letter, but it is not a policy issue. It's more about practice. And
Okay.
regulation, maybe.
Okay. Thanks so much.
Yes.
thanks. Other questions or comments? Matthew, did you have a question, or was that just by accident?
Yeah, I do not have access to this week's notes and the documents.
Oh,
Unless you're-
the board notebook under correspondence?
Yes.
Okay, I guess we'll have Trent follow up with you, Matthew. I'm sorry. I don't
Okay.
know why you wouldn't have access. But yeah, I'll have Trent get back to you on that. Okay.
Yeah, I don't have access as well.
And same with you, McKenna, you didn't have access? Okay. I will have Trent follow up with you. Were you able to get any of the materials at all tonight, guys? No. Okay. Steve, I see your hand is up.
Just a quick question I read the letter. So we do have that policy in place, and it was a fact that we didn't follow the procedure. We don't have any of that language. So what she cited is not actually anywhere in the student handbook.
What is being described as policy is not policy. It's more about regulation and practice, and regulations and policies are pushed out to families every year or anytime there is a change. But she's using the word policy, which is something that the Board of Education would address. But we've already straightened out with that person that this is not policy. This is not a reference to policy at all. I just want to clarify, I'm sure there's some confusion and the board is wondering. The Board of Education email is up front on our website, and we've been finding in the last 6 to 9 months that people have access to it actually more easily than they have access to any of the staff who work here, because they can just hit a button, whereas with us there's more of a process to get to us. And that is because our IT department was concerned that phishing could happen much more readily if our emails were right up front. And so sometimes what's happening is people are writing to the Board of Ed about issues that are not Board of Education issues at all. And that puts me and Trent in sort of an ethical dilemma. We would never not give the board something that has been addressed to the board, but they're not board issues. So what happens in the interim between the time the email comes in and the time there's a board meeting is I reach out to the individual and say, thank you very much for making us aware. This is definitely a superintendent or a building administrator issue. How can we help? And that has gone on already in this case. If it were a policy problem, if it were really a policy problem, then I'd be bringing it to the board as a policy concern. I'd actually be going to the policy committee. But the word policy is being used interchangeably with practice, and that's administrative.
Well, I guess my question is there a
Tara, I'm gonna cut off. I'm gonna cut off. I'm just wondering whether we should cut this conversation right now.
Yeah. So I am going to say this. So Steve, I'm going to let you finish your comment because I know you've got a question about policy and I definitely want you to ask it. But I do want to say, George, I see your hand up. Eileen, I see your hand up. This is what was written to us isn't something that's our board business. And so we do need to let Jan take care of it. But if you have a general question about
policies or what have you, I'm going to try to limit the questions, but, give
Okay,
everybody an opportunity to
I'll
ask.
try and rephrase.
Okay, that'd be great.
The administrative regulations regarding that's quoted, is that in a student handbook or not?
It's a regulation that is pushed out by email. I can't answer whether that particular one is in the student handbook, but that is given to all families every year.
Okay, and then if that's a regulation, then yes, we need to follow up. I understand you doing that. I just want to reiterate that needs to be followed. If we have it in writing, we need to follow it. If we don't like the way it's written, then it needs to be changed.
Right, but that wouldn't be us that sets the regulation. Okay, we set the policy, and then that's the administration's job. Okay. Okay, thanks. Eileen, did you have a follow-up?
No, I wanted just to say congratulations on the bi-monthly participation for educators of multilingual learners. I think it's a terrific initiative. It's on the Correspondence. And I think it's great. I've never really seen this done in a public school, and I think it's exceptional. And you can maybe share that, and they have their contact information, but I think that's really should be recognized. It's fabulous.
Thanks, Eileen.
You're welcome.
All right, any other questions or comments? All right, so moving on, meeting minutes, I'd like a motion to approve the minutes as presented.
So moved.
Moved by Eileen. Do we have a second? Second by Trevor. All in favor, aye.
We gotta have discussion first.
What?
Okay, I'm sorry. Discussion?
You just have to ask, that's all.
Okay.
I do just have one quick question on that is, we had talked about having maybe the two different types of minutes for comparison, because there was a lengthy discussion about minutes last meeting. I didn't know if we had that.
So we had talked about that, and we had agreed that last week's minutes were not, or last meeting's minutes probably wouldn't be a good benchmarking exercise, so that we were going to wait until after this meeting to do that. Go ahead, Karen.
And I was just going to add that our attorney did write those minutes. They weren't done by Trent. Therefore, that was going to be excluded from that discussion. So tonight's minutes should reflect that.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, so we'll come back to that, but thank you for asking, Steve, and thank you for keeping me on course. All right, any further discussion? No. All right, all in favor, aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, so moved. So before we start with our next set of issues and discussions for tonight, just kind of to set the table, Jan did not present us with any motions for any of these tonight. These are all just discussions that we're having, their presentations. The first one, the DESA presentation, is something the board had asked for more information and follow up on. The school start time is a follow-up from our last meeting in specific or not our last meeting, but our last discussion about school start time. And specific to that, there's going to be some follow-up items before this comes to the board for a vote, probably later this year. So I just wanted to, follow up from our conversation, our last meeting about the cadence. The reason that there's no motions presented with tonight's, information is because we're not expecting a vote on anything. So if that's clear, hopefully that's clear. We'll move on to our first presentation, and I'll hand it over to Jan, Kathy, and Leah.
Okay, and thank you very much. And yes, this was a board request when we talked about DESA and the assessment that was going to be done here in this district this year for the first time. The board had
I don't have any audio.
Yeah, I think we lost you, Jan, from a audio perspective.
She's muted.
Yep.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, but there's echo, Jan.
Echo.
Everybody else should be muted though.
Right.
Oh,
Yeah, we still don't hear Jen, just so you know.
How about now?
Yes.
Okay, so we had to switch it up. Trent is actually going to do the presentation. Leah was going to do it, but when she hit share, it muted us. So, this was something that the Board of Education had asked for as a follow-up. We had been talking about DESA and how it was being used as a screener here for the first time. And Leah O'Connor, our SEL coordinator, really took lead on this project, and it's a good thing that she did because it was a massive project. It's certainly going to be giving us some very important information, but it needed a lot of follow-up and follow-through, and Leah took that over with Kathy's support through that department. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Leah O'Connor to tell you about our DESA screener, K through 8.
Thank you, Jan. Good evening, everyone. I'm excited tonight to be able to share with you the results from Old Saybrook Public Schools' first social emotional learning screener. I tonight hope the purpose of the presentation is to first and foremost give a little bit of background on this screener, what it is, what it intends to do, how we used it in our district at this point, most importantly, what our data looks like, and then what our next steps are moving forward. So I'll just be kind of I'll just say next slide. That's how we go. Thank you. So the background information, the DESA, it's considered, the actual name for it is the Dubrow Student Strength Assessment, and it was originally developed by the Center for Resilient Children, which if you've heard of that before, they've done a great deal of research in all forms and all kinds of trauma, social emotional learning, anxiety, and other issues with children across many decades. It is a standardized test. It's a strength-based rating scale, which is a little bit different than some other kinds of screeners that are typically done. And it is completed in 5 to 8 minutes per child. So it's very quick. If you have a teacher with a classroom of 15 students, it can be done, in under an hour. It's used to measure the social emotional competence in children K through 8. And it's grounded in resilience theory. And when we've talked in the past about our alignment as a district related to social emotional learning, we've used the CASTLE framework, which as a reminder is the Collaborative for Academic and Social Emotional Learning. And that is really the backbone of research-based interventions and supports at this time in education as we collectively move forward and determine steps to help our students in the scope of social emotional learning. It assesses 8 social emotional competencies and is intended to help educators plan instruction, document strengths, identify areas of needs, and document progress monitoring for those as well. And it allows to evaluate program outcomes, especially because it has a pre and post test. Go to the next slide, please. So the way we specifically use this test, in last spring, quite a few schools, obviously coming out of quite a couple of years with COVID, were approached by the state to implement the DESA. And as schools applied, Old Saybrook Public Schools did, and we were accepted into what was called Cohort 2. The timing of Cohort 2, as I'll talk about later, one of the limitations really beyond our control is that Cohort 2, we were only able to first administer the DESA just recently in February, and then we pretty quickly have to do a post rating. Whereas Cohort 1, or an ideal situation, if we were to do this again, we'd hope to have teachers do it maybe October, November after they got to know the students and have a number of months to implement any what we call growth strategies and then assess the growth through a post-assessment. But I will explain a little bit further later. Aperture I'll be referring to in here. So Aperture is the company who's overseeing the assessment and who we have a direct rep with and has all of the follow-up information that we access as a portal. So there are 2 kind of different designs. We had a K through 8 model, which was the teacher rating. So this means that a teacher in classrooms K through 8 would be doing an 8-question DESA mini. They would be answering 8 questions on a child, which I did enclose as a PDF provided in this meeting, and we'll get to that as well, but you have the ability to see the 8 questions. And then if a student is triggered, it automatically in the system digitally, if a student is showing need there, it'll trigger the full DESA, which is 72 questions, and would take closer to 10 minutes to complete, a little bit longer. We were also accepted to do the grades 9 through 12 SSR, which is a student self-report at the high school. So again, K through 8 teachers are rating their children. 9 through 12, the high school students were going to rate themselves. Due to an issue not with us, but with the state, there was a contract issue, to my understanding, with Aperture, and they've postponed the SSR for everyone in Cohort 2 to the fall. So that has some pros and cons, but it's given us an opportunity to really focus on our K through 8 data, and we look forward to doing the SSR hopefully in the fall with the high school students. Our timeline for Cohort 2, as I mentioned, the teachers rated the students in early February. We did that partially on a PD day. We're planning and implementing what we're calling growth strategies in certain areas, March through May. And then we'll be doing a post-rating by late May or early June.
Yeah,
absolutely.
This is great. Good to have asked a question. I guess my first question would be the DESA, is that a fixed set of questions as a baseline, and therefore a student in California would be asked the same questions as a Connecticut DESA
yes.
student then? Okay.
And it doesn't change. Some questions on certain tests change as you go through them. This one is standardized each way. That does not do that.
Okay.
So, yep, but it's nationally normed. So the background information, this is a great visual. We refer to the CASEL standards pretty regularly. The CASEL standards on the outside, those are really 5 areas: self-management, decision-making, social awareness, relationship skills, self-awareness. Those 5 areas are the overarching ones. And then the DESA screens for actually 8 competencies within that. Let me go to the next slide. The 8 competencies, hopefully you can see these. I know it was a little blurry, but these give the definitions of each competency. And on the full DESA, several of the questions of the 72 questions directly correspond to each of these 8 areas. And it's interesting because you could have kids identified who are in need for the full DESA, but can't come up typical in maybe 5 of the areas, but really have their needs be in maybe 3 of the competencies, for example. Okay, next slide. Okay, so just as a refresher to give you a visual, again, this was an online portal that teachers had access to, and that went really smoothly. These are the 8 questions that teachers answer on a Likert scale type rating. And these 8 questions would, in a class of 15 students, or doesn't matter the number, usually under 4% of students in that class would trigger a full DESA, which is the second form. So this is the DESA mini. And then the next slide is an overview of the full DESA. And I know this is really tiny. So you do have a PDF of this one that was provided. And these 72 questions are in a direct alignment with specific questions tied to specific competencies. And just as an example, these questions are ones that teachers probably look for in their students, both socially, as a group, individually over time. But I think it gives an extra level of awareness as they move forward in working with students in a social, emotional way. So I thought the questions were interesting. Go to the next slide. Just in alignment with goals and rationale for the district, we support students' well-being by the goal was to use a screener to assess their competencies. In general, this really yielded positive results for our students, K through 8. It really helps support our ongoing monitoring and make sure that our programming is targeted and that we are always in a growth mindset. Our strengths overall, our students are outperforming national averages in typical and strength-based competencies in SEL. I'll explain a bit, but that there's 3 categories: areas of need, typical, and strength. And our students did better than the national averages significantly. This really speaks to our safe, supportive environment, which has been part of our plan for a very long time, and investment in social emotional learning. Some growth opportunities we have moving forward connected to our goals are focusing on 2 competencies. We're going to be focusing on goal-directed behavior based on our results and personal responsibility. Provide more support to identify tier 3 students, which these students are consistent with ones in many cases who have already had established needs, and then work on universal growth strategies that benefit all tier 1 students.
Hey, Leah. We have a question from Karina. Go ahead, Karina.
Thank you. I'm so sorry to interrupt your presentation. Just a quick question.
Oh, that's okay.
Is it so the DESA Mini is completed by teachers on all students in their classroom?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Eileen, did you have a question too?
Sure, maybe. I think maybe I have it confused. Did the students K through 8 are also, they're taking this as well?
No, they are not. Nope, the students are not self-assessing. So we made parents aware back in fall of our different screeners. If you remember, we had the BI, the anxiety inventory, and then this one we let them know the background of this. But this is a teacher rating the student. Whereas the high school one that we haven't done yet, the student self-report, would be the students rating themselves, which is most appropriate because there's really not a tied-in teacher at the high school, given their schedule and the way a high school moves about their day. That would be the most appropriate person really to answer these.
Yeah, so the question, if the teacher's assessing and the children are English language learners, how are they assessing if it's a language issue or if it's just, how they, really able to report back if there's some questions?
That did come up, but we have some students who, might more significantly struggle if, well, let me back up. There were very few students who weren't assessed. There were a few students who, if they were, it would be really difficult if they were, depending on their level of functioning, really couldn't. I'd say a small handful at every school. It wasn't appropriate to have them. They're in a behavior-based plan and program anyways. As far as ELL students, I'll be honest with you that did not come up at all. I think these students are very well, integrated into the classroom climate, and the teacher has a strong sense of them. But what we did do is allow any additional folks who service these students to collaborate with the teachers. So we had speech pathologists, speech and language pathologists, special ed case managers be weighing in on the, on the screener itself so that it would be equitable.
Right, but I'm not necessarily talking about speech and language. I know that you have bilingual teachers in the schools and they would be able to get a sense of their competency in their own language so that when they answer, the teachers are able to answer the questions, speak about positive things, which is number 3. If they don't have, language competency, they're not going to be able to explain it to you in English.
Okay, so I just want to make sure I understand the question. You're saying that a child wouldn't have those, they wouldn't have the full background in language to be expressive in that way for the regular ed teacher in the classroom to make an honest assessment of something.
There might be a challenge there. Yeah, because some of these are nonverbal. Some of those you don't really need language. You can follow your group, you can follow different things, but that particular one has to do with language competency and be able to express themselves.
Mm-hmm. That's a really good point. I don't have a direct answer for you right now in terms of
I just wanted to mention it.
Yeah, absolutely. We check in with a rep from Aperture quite regularly. So now that you bring that up, I will be happy to ask her that question.
Or if there's a bilingual person that I know we have some at Goodwin School and, in the other schools that they can, they would know the competencies of those kids to be able to access the information in their own language. It wouldn't be in English, but they could probably tell you in their own language and you could assess them that way.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Karen, you've got your hand up too. Go ahead, Karen.
Yeah, just a quick question, Leah. So, for example, with the mini DESA, the same questions are asked about kindergartners all the way through 8th grade. I guess my question is, developmentally, those little ones haven't developed or haven't acquired the skills the same way that the older students have. So does that affect results or skew the results at all? Just because they're not developmentally acquired yet, I would think.
Right, so the 8 questions, they are supposed to be vetted for not limiting for developmental level. I think one of the limitations in general of a screener like this, like any assessment, is the level of bias. You know, we have a number of different teachers, even across a grade level, thinking about how they answer these questions, but the teachers did have training. It was quite an extensive training. And it was really interesting, actually, to talk about bias and how we think about children at different developmental levels. And that was something that they had kind of gone through to make sure everyone was sort of on a equal playing field for that. But it is to really look at these questions within the realm of what can be developmentally appropriate for these students. So contributing to group efforts might look for a kindergartner just being able to handle, you know, manipulatives, respond to a point in a story with a group, obviously very different than a 4th grader. Right. But I think the training provided some background on that.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. So connection to our strategic plan, really this emphasizes, as I mentioned before, a safe and supportive environment. If our kids, you know, looking at where they fall with social emotional competence, factors into how they feel about themselves and others. Connecting to building goals. Next, thank you. We're supporting students' social emotional learning using formative data to identify needs, embedding skills to address those needs in instruction, and ensuring student voice and choice as a regular part of learning. We use, you know, we will bridge SEL, PBIS, and restorative practices to support students' social emotional well-being. And this is an ongoing task with the district to embed the concepts of SEL in daily practice. For our role here in PBS, we have committees at each school. We are helping to develop them, collaborate with them, have it be ongoing to support the DESA data, and as well continue to develop and support a scope and sequence across P to 12 that makes sense for everyone and is growing on common language. So in getting into the next part of this, which is really the statistics and data, I'll share with you, you can go to the next slide. This is what the DESA mini and full DESA look like in terms of what the breakdown looks like. So full DESA can be done in a minute by a teacher. The DESA mini, the full DESA, supposedly 5 to 7 minutes. You'll see the red, blue, and green codes in between here. And what you're seeing right now is where students fell in their T-scores. 40 and below indicated a need for instruction. If they had a 41 through 59, these were our students in the typical area in social emotional competence, and 60 and above was students who indicated a strength in this area. So next slide. At a glance, this next slide shows you what our district looked like in terms of the results. So you will see there in the blue that we had, 70% of our students fall in the typical area. If that's combined with the strength, you'll see that that's 22%. So we are over 90% of our students are either typical or strength, and we have 8% of students who fell in need. If you're visually looking at it, I'm always, a bar graph person and visually like to look at it. When you look at the K through 8 below by grade level, you'll see that we had, some great overall, and this isn't to compare schools at all, but just while still low, those in 5th through 8th grade at the middle school exhibited slightly higher comparatively to Goodwin in the needs area. We also saw a little uptick in the 4th grade if you're looking at Goodwin for students who exhibited need, and then very small numbers K1, 2, and 3. Go to the next slide, please. We're going to take a couple minutes to just look a little bit more directly at each school. So Goodwin, whenever I present this, for whatever reason, those numbers up there, 1, 2, 3, 8 get moved, but they're fine on my PowerPoint. So I'll just kind of tell you that the kindergarten red need for instruction was just 1 student. The first grade was 2, second grade was 3, and third grade was 3 as well. And then the fourth grade was 8 students. So those were the numbers. If you look compared to the national norms here, so national norms are 16% students are in need, 68% typical, and 16% strength. Goodwin is 10% less need according to those national norms, and our combined strength is 94 compared to a national norm combined of 84. So that really speaks to, that's really positive for us to look at. You can go to the next slide. The data breakdown of the DESA Mini continued a little bit to make some observations here. Kindergarten really had the highest percent of typical across all grades and the lowest need for instruction. First grade had the lowest typical, but they're really offset by the highest number of students with strength. So it's a 96% combined typical and strength for our first graders. Second and third grade almost has identical data down to just like 1%. And then the fourth grade, like I mentioned, was that highest need for instruction. And then they had the lowest combined typical and strength. And we're going to explain in a little bit how we're going to move forward with supporting those areas. On the next slide, I just blew up this one visual to give you the 7 students on the full DESA. So this is the 72 questions. Even though 17 were identified initially for a need for instruction, based on their T-scores when they had the full DESA, 3 still fell close to that 40 middle baseline, and then really 14 of those are ones that need instruction. So I hope that makes sense. This is different than the DESA Mini, but within those results of the 72 questions, those 3 kids were kind of on the bubble. Next screen.
Karina, I see that you have a question, and I also, Karen, do you have a question, or is your hand still up from the last question? Okay, so go ahead, Karina.
Thank you. Just a quick question. I know you're going to address what actions you're going to take, but I'm curious, and I realize this is the first time it's been administered, so it may be premature, but do you have any sense as to, like a hypothesis as to why the need increased for the 4th grade? And then also I have the same question for middle school, like what's contributing to either an increase in strengths or an increase in need?
Yes, so these topics were discussed at each level, especially where the administration in each school and the school counselors, psychologists, and social workers know these students best. There are some hypotheses. There are some little aha moments of, again, when we look at a screener, it's a moment in time. But I don't think a lot of these results were, especially when we looked at the students in need, were a surprise. And by grade band, you'll see that these are typically transition years. And then we had a lot of conversations related to, the effects of COVID. It's interesting, like our kindergartners did so well. They don't know anything really different, a lot of those kids. This is them entering their first year in education. And while they might have some self-regulation issues that have come up, perhaps, this is their first experience entering school and there is a SEL focus. I could elaborate further, but I do think it's a conversation we've had at the Goodwin SEL level and the STM meetings, and the 4th grade has already, kind of been known with a few of the students who were higher, and sometimes it's just a bubble of students. And then in was it the 8th grade? Yeah, the 8th grade also was not surprising based on these students traditionally the past couple of years struggling with higher, I think, discipline referrals and just struggling to settle in.
I think to fully answer that question, I think you rightly identified, Karina, that we will need some longitudinal information with this screener. We also need some context. We've got these national norms, but you know, what does that look like around us? And then as we begin the interventions for students, as we begin the direct instruction, I think that the professionals who work with them every day are going to, you know, create hypotheses and act on them and see how students respond and react and get a better sense of what's going on.
Great, thank you.
Karen, you had your hand up. Go ahead.
I do, yeah, and I apologize. I forgot to lower my hand after my last question, but I do have a quick question, and I just want to know how are these results shared with parents?
At this time, the results have not been shared with parents in terms of this global perspective. However, we did inform parents that we were doing the data screener, and then the students who were in need for instruction, it's being integrated into, I'm going to get to a little bit, but 97% of the students are on a plan, either through 504 consult process or IEP. So the case managers or individuals who work with them most closely are going to see if the alignment with their goals and otherwise integrates with the DESA and tactfully share that information.
George, I saw your hand up next, and then Eileen.
Just a quick question. So the slide that you have on right now, right? So the full DESA, was that given to all the students, or just certain people that met certain criteria within the DESA mini?
The latter. Yep.
Okay. So I'm sorry.
When you see 80% up there in need for instruction, that's not of all students. That's of the small group that were identified for the full DESA. So you're seeing 14 and 3.
So essentially, you took all the students who were identified as in need from the mini DESA, and then you did a full DESA on them.
Yes.
Oh, okay. And then from that, it looks like, you know, some of them actually came out more positive than the mini would have indicated. And so my question then is the flip side, right? How many of the typical from the mini, I mean, obviously you can't do it for everybody because that's a lot of work, but if you basically just randomly picked a handful, you know, and just did a full on them, would some of them fall into the needs instruction? I mean, essentially it's the false positive, right? That we worry about, right? So that the mini identify them as typical when in fact they may actually need instruction.
So is your question that could there be false positive, for lack of a better term, although in COVID times we think of that as something bad, false positive information that really would be more negative if we were to put them through the full screener?
Correct.
So I don't think it was designed to work that way, so I don't know that we would be able, I don't know that we would be able to get information that we could accurately utilize.
I mean, the same way that here, I mean, these 17 students who were identified as needing instructions, when the 3 of them were given a full DESA, they were identified as typical. Maybe, I mean, I'm not exactly sure what the processes afterwards, but I suspect that they would need less instruction. The concern is the people who were identified as typical in the mini would fall through the cracks because when in fact, when they were given a full DESA, they actually would need instruction.
I think if we did that, we'd be doing more of an assessment of the validity of the instrument or the validity of the individuals doing the assessment. I'm not sure we would be able to say we were getting valid information about the students.
Fair enough.
Thanks, George. Eileen, I saw your hand up too.
Thanks. I think this is for Leah or for Jan. I'm not really a statistics person, but on the slide, I don't know if it has a number, but DESA mini and full DESA, because there's just 8 questions, are they weighted? How do they get like 40 and below and 41 to 59? How do they get that?
Right. So the DESA mini, just to clarify, the 8 questions does not tell us about a student, what their competencies are and where they fall. It's designed to, because I think I asked a similar question of our rep, because originally I thought, wow, how can 8 questions tell us all this information about a student? It does not. It has an algorithm set up online for if they hit enough of the areas, I'm sure occasionally, never, rarely, or occasionally, that then would trigger the full DESA.
Okay, so that's where there's 8 questions, but depending on the question, they're given different scores, right?
A degree.
Right, like that raw score sum that's at the bottom is probably some threshold. I don't know what it is.
No, that's okay. Yeah, I was just curious, but I appreciate your clarification. And if I need to follow up, I'll follow it up with you or Jan. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Ellen.
Sure.
Yeah. Go ahead, Ellie. Go ahead, Leah.
Okay, so we're all set in questions for right now?
Yes.
Okay, so we can go to the next slide. These were the competencies, which are really interesting. So as I shared before, there's 8 of them. They fall under 5 general CASEL standards, and the 2 areas highest for Goodwin to look at in need was goal-directed behavior and personal responsibility. Goodwin also came up in the 70th percentile up there for social awareness. So these are the areas that we have targeted instruction designed around, and falls under responsible decision-making and self-management. Next slide. Okay, looking at something similar for the middle school, the same structure. You'll see here that, as I mentioned before, we have specific numbers in each grade, but the 8th grade was a little bit higher. The middle school, compared to the national norm, had 5% less in the need area, and still a very high 89% combined typical and strength. So even our 8th grade there, we don't want to we don't want to negatively paint that 8th grade, because they are still significantly doing really well in all of the areas. If this was, a report card, so to speak, but there's always room to support these kids. The next slide, please.
Eileen, did you have a question?
Yeah, just like, could you give just an example of what would be a goal-directed behavior that would be assessed that then teachers are going to work on, as well as personal responsibility? If there's an example, what does that look like?
Yes, I'm trying to find.
I'm just thinking, like, do they put their coat away? Do they take out their pens and pencils? Right. Yeah, thanks so much.
So I'll tell you that, so for a goal-directed behavior, the definition is a child's initiation of and persistence in completing tasks of varying difficulty. So that building scaffolding. So 3 questions on the DESA that tied directly to that was: keep trying when unsuccessful, seek out additional information, and take steps to achieve goals. So a great tool we use with kids a lot is SMART goals. Taking them through what it looks like developmentally appropriate for them to set a goal, to measure it, and so forth. Keep trying when unsuccessful. Certainly sometimes that's self-regulation skills for a younger child. But at the middle school level, harder material, the ante gets upped every year. So if a student has a limitation or difficulty in one area, whether it be art or science, that they still have that resiliency built in to grow from that. So those are just a couple examples of what it might look like. And then there's all different kinds of curriculum that can help support that, which is a more explicit instruction.
And personal responsibility would be?
Their tendency to be careful and reliable in his or her actions and in contributing to group efforts. Some of the questions that were direct relation to that was: remember important information, serve an important role at home or at school, and as simple as handle his or her belongings with care.
Thanks
so that's your kid coming in from recess and their backpacks overflowing. Again, a lot of this goes back to organizational skills, which ties back to self-management, the interrelatedness of social awareness and how that relates to others.
Thank you very much.
Sure. So, I showed this visual before. This is just a little more close up of the middle school, but just gives, some highlights. 5th grade had the greatest strength band despite its transition year. 6th grade had the highest typical, as well as those who were in full need of the DESA they had the highest number of students on that bubble that we talked about. 7th grade was really high with, in the school for their highest typical and strength, which I found interesting just in general, because I think when people look back at middle school, they think of 7th grade as that, you know, dark hallway year. And then 8th grade, while they had the highest need, they were 83% for the national average in strength and typical. Okay, next slide. Okay, so full DESA overview. We had 43 students identified at the middle school level, and 10 of those were on that, you know, typical bubble within those 8 competencies, and 33 were identified for that need for instruction. So I think maybe this slide makes a little bit more sense after the questions before. This is really highlighting the students who were initially identified for instruction. And then the competencies, which is the next slide, interestingly enough, fell directly in line. Next slide, please. Thanks, John. Directly in line with Goodwin, goal-directed behavior, personal responsibility. I did want to mention that when staff took a survey I gave them in September, these ones came up as, these were teachers' concerns with students as well. So I just thought that that was interesting. And social awareness did come up as a high one from them at the beginning of the year. It's a little lower here for the middle school, but that was high at Goodwin for the DESA data. All right, so at a district level, this next slide just gives the overarching picture. We have 47 students here in need for instruction. We have 13 students who, you know, within that fell in that typical range. And on the next slide, as I just mentioned, the areas that we want to support the most are goal-directed behavior and personal responsibility, which, you know, we're hoping to, you know, gradually make sure that our students developmentally have skills that are developmentally appropriate across K to 8, using a lot of the same language and familiarizing themselves with these core competencies, in addition to really the teachers working with it as well. So the last couple slides here, I just want to say, you know, the successes for this, you know, I'll just speak for a moment as a parent in this district to look at this with the lens of that. I mean, this really I have to applaud the efforts of, you know, the schools and the teachers and what's going on in the classroom. 92% of our students are typical, and those who have strengths, it's really wonderful. And I hope to be able to integrate, you know, or work with them in the future and have these positive skills, you know, come out and help, you know, uplift their peers. Our students in the typical or strengths range are 8% higher than the national average. I have to tell you, I was on a community of practice call with some other districts last week, and their mouths kind of dropped with our number and said, oh gosh, your old Saybrook, like, we're really high and we're really in murky water with trying to, you know, look at this number of kids with the band of needs. So that was really promising. We really spent time looking at the list of students. Obviously, the names to me personally, I do not know in depth, but the teams who work with these students, it was a lot of head nods, a lot of, this is the approach we're taking, not a surprise. Here's where we're going with this student. Here's where we can see the growth. And they were identified within the consult process, 504 already identified for special education. And another success, you know, we constantly are reiterating, are reviewing rather our processes for addressing students in this realm. Our program is offering really strong universal interventions and constantly tweaking the tier 1 and 2 interventions, from everything to, we had a collaborative services team meeting last week. We're having, you know, a male intern with youth services really, you know, try to work with some of those that happen to be males, students who need support. And he was interested in, oh, these were your 2 areas. Yeah, I would like to work with students in those competency areas. Obviously, there's always room for growth. So some of the challenges in this whole process. Next slide. Oh, thanks. While the data offers specifics on our students most in need, the mini does not provide the insight into what areas our typical students could benefit from. And I think, you know, I shared that just before. The post-rating window structured by Aperture, requires us to do post-rating in May or June. We know that as skies become sunnier and kids start to wrap up for the end of the year, they might have had a really off day, and that's a hard time for teachers to rate them, let alone it's a short window for us to implement strategies. Nonetheless, we've started them as soon as this week. It's a short timeline for the growth strategy implementation, so observable changes, or more observable rather, in the future may be better, pre and post with a larger span of time. And lastly, Aperture's growth strategies are helpful, but they're not always there's no one size fits all. Like with any curriculum, you modify it, you tailor it. We want to be sensitive to the other initiatives teachers are working on, and we don't want to just throw a lesson at a teacher and say, go do this, this supports this competency. We want to be mindful and strategic and sensitive for it to go over best with students and staff. And that requires time, effort, planning, and teacher buy-in. And I think that's already going well, since we have some established inroads already with programming we're already doing, where we're enhancing both of those. And so for lastly, next steps. Like I said, this information, next slide, please, Trent. This information has been shared with the faculty at each school. It's an ongoing conversation. These competencies are starting, the teachers are well versed in them, the students are getting to be familiar with them. And we're reviewing what are our current tiered resources and supports. What do we want to keep doing? What do we want to start doing? Our implementation of growth strategies for the SEL teams at the different schools. In the first bullet there, I'm mentioning the competencies we're targeting, although those don't have to be exclusive. I think any universal, if we have like some really good lessons already tied to, for example, our Pride lessons, or to what, for example, we're doing in Goodwin, which is second step curriculum, these mesh really nicely with material the students are already familiar with. For Goodwin, we are curating right now Google Classroom. I'm heading that up with Denise Tedesco, Jen LaPlante, Marissa McCarthy. Heston was part of that conversation as well last week, and we planned a good deal of it during the PD day. We are creating a Google Drive within a Google Classroom, where we're asking teachers before the April break to access some of these with the full directions, and then again give us some feedback in between April and mid-May, do some different ones. We're giving them some voice and choice and team planning to decide really what's best with their population, rather than saying, this is what you're doing with your group of students, since they have a sense in their individual classroom and team what might be most appropriate. The middle school, we're increasing the SEL curriculum in the next 4 weeks. We're having a weekly Friday, beginning this Friday, where our team looked at the appropriate lessons. We're giving background to the students, and the teachers are doing an extended homeroom 1 day a week with the interventions, and then having a wellness day, a cumulative experience, which is a little bit different than last year, with some SEL focus to that on Friday, May 6th. K-8. Just in general, we're really looking at those tier 3 students and genuinely incorporating the SEL goals that are appropriate already into their programming for the groups they're in, or joining a group, individual counseling, etc., which is inclusive of progress monitoring. There'll be a spring post rating, as I mentioned, and we will use that data, as Jan said, to inform planning for next year, but help us have a new data point for more longitudinal planning. And then the high school will have the SSR hopefully in the fall, which will just give us a greater sense of K-12 where our students fall. So in conclusion, I'm just reiterating that it was very positive. There's room for us to really support students. It's not a black and white thing. Data gives us information that's black and white. But people are people, kids are humans, teachers are as well. And this is a topic that is a little different, as you know, than some other areas. So we hope in working and moving forward, I think we have a good plan. And I'm really looking forward to, working with the teachers and staff and seeing how the next couple months go and getting that feedback.
And the only thing that I would add to this very comprehensive presentation is, the reason why Leah is here is because before there was even a DESA on the radar, we knew that COVID and the last 2 years has had an impact on students across the nation. I'm actually quite pleased to see that our students are in relatively great place. And I attribute that to, the work that the staff has been doing all year and that they were doing last year, the fact that we were open, the fact that, kids were in school, that were part of a community that their values match the values of the district. And I think the values that are inherent in the DESA about what makes a successful learner and what skills, what emotional skills need to be in place so that they can access learning. And I'm very excited to see what this develops for us longitudinally. And the fact that this focuses our attention on specific needs that are more prevalent is very valuable to us because, as you know, time is the most precious thing to educators, and to be able to focus our work because of this information that we've received is very powerful for us. So I just want to say thank you to Leah for spearheading this work.
Thanks, Jan. Looks like Eileen, you've got a question. Go ahead.
I was going to follow up on, and maybe it was already answered and I didn't pay attention, sorry. My question is, again, how or when might you be communicating some of these areas to families, or do they know that you're giving these to the children so that if there's certain ways that they can be part of the collaboration to achieve the goal, like more of a homeschool partnership? That would be probably helpful. So I'm just curious to know your thoughts on that.
Sure. I think we'll definitely be communicating that these are two areas within, our school newsletters that we're focusing on moving forward, having done the DESA. But the consensus was really on individual parent communications and meetings for those students in need. It wasn't, because it's such a small number and because already a lot of these students have that level of support, and whomever is working with them in that way would be, I think, the most appropriate person communicating that. And we've definitely discussed that. It's not something that's being non-transparent or whatnot with a parent. So it might be most appropriate in an upcoming spring PPT in some cases, but in others where they might meet with a student or parent more regularly, say a school psychologist or social worker, it would be shared.
The other pieces that might be advantageous because families might really know that their children are doing significantly well socially and emotionally, especially in lieu of COVID. Because I know that
you're saying the overall kind of picture in some capacity.
I'm just thinking because most parents don't, really think about that, but there was a drive to do this. And while we think, I know Jan, certainly is reinforcing it. It's something that we believe is really important regardless, but there's certain things that come about with pandemics or endemics. And, some students might be more sensitive, but others may be handling things well at the moment.
Right. Yeah, it is very positive news and a nice piece of information to share. So I'll definitely follow up with that.
Just an idea. I know that it would be great, as a parent, if I learned something about my child in a positive way, because usually it's, no, not usually, but it's nice to keep it balanced.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thanks again.
Thank you.
George, I see your hand up.
Yes, I mean, again, just starting off, Amelia, fantastic presentation. Well done. A lot of stuff here to wrap my head around. Just a couple of quick questions. So just so I understand this, so the specific targeting of the competencies, the three competencies, goal-directed behavior, personal responsibility, and social awareness, is directed at the small cohort of students that basically were identified as needing instructions. Is that correct?
Yes, but Best practices show that doing universal programming surrounding these helps not only those students, but all of the students. So we already have programs in place at both schools that support social emotional learning. We're just tweaking it a bit to have more focus in this area moving forward. So these are topics that they'd already explore, but maybe they've done a lot with, for example, emotions, emotional regulation. We might back off a little bit of that and do, something related to the three areas we mentioned. Does that make sense?
It does, but I guess this is this is perhaps the crux of my question, right? Is in your challenge slide, the very first bullet item indicated that that the challenges is the full DESA data. Well, let me rephrase this: the mini DESA doesn't identify the specific areas for the entire group, because that's the entire group did the mini DESA. And so, but essentially, it translated the needs of the people who the small cohort that did the full DESA onto the entire group, and so right. I mean, that's one. I mean, it sounds like what you were saying. That's what you guys are doing, and then a follow up to that is you guys essentially viewing all 8 competencies with equal weighting, and so whatever the core competencies that scored the least well among the smaller cohort are the ones that you is going to get ramped up or have more attention to, versus the other ones that maybe didn't do so well. But if assessed that it's a higher importance competency, it may be a more general use, whether that's something that was considered in the decision of which of the 3 to focus on for the entire district, or not this entire district, K through 8. And there's a lot there. I'm not sure if I've made all myself clear.
I'll speak to your I'll speak to your question toward the beginning, where you're absolutely right in how you're surmising the full picture. But there's a lot of crosswalking between these competencies. So when we're pulling lessons from the vetted ones on Aperture or otherwise, there's a lot of skills embedded in one that cross over to some of the others. So they're not directly in silos as you might originally think. So the other piece of this is that I guess the area that I would like to focusing on these 2 or 3 competencies, I don't think leaves the other ones out for the other students, because we have been throughout the whole year focusing, focus isn't really the right word, constantly adapting and using lessons and strategies that tie in all 8 of them. And really all 8 of them fall under the 5 CASEL standards. So I understand where you're coming from. Are we leaving out an area, so to speak, that the general population could benefit from? Are kids going from typical to strength? Possibly, but I think more or less I think of SEL a lot of times as it's like the do no harm curriculum that has such a bonus for so many students. And in a particular time, they may have major social awareness stuff back in October, and now it's not coming up, or vice versa, so that's just my personal point of view. But I think we are touching on all of those, and we're not going to neglect the other ones, but just have a short period of time where we pull these lessons that were more correlated to those 3.
I think the other side of that, as a high school person, when I watch elementary teachers teach, I tell them all the time, it looks like I'm watching magic, because they don't do anything in isolation. There are so many things going on at once, and so many different life skills being taught, including socio-emotional skills. And it's seamless. I don't even think anyone, including some of the adults in the room, know what's going on, that means me, until I can assess it and analyze it afterwards. So I think that even just making our staff aware of these 8 areas kind of confirms for them that this is something that they have been doing all along, and perhaps makes them more conscious of it and therefore more repeatable.
And I will just mention one more note on the wellness days coming up. Like for the middle school, we're tweaking how that's been done in the past. So the students are going to have a full sampling of all 8 of those. So there'll be all different things that the kids cycle through, similar to what they did in the fall. And that looks a little bit different classroom level at Goodwin, but the exposure is absolutely still there.
Thanks.
Any other questions from the board or comments? Trent, I think we're good with the presentation.
Great, thank you.
Okay, thanks so much, Leah. That was excellent. And really, go ahead, Jan.
May I recommend that, given the time, that we move the student representative exit survey up on the agenda?
Yes, that would be fine. I don't think we need to vote on that. Great. Well, thanks again, Leah. I appreciate your presentation. Eileen and Jan, do you want to talk about the student representative survey?
I'll defer to Eileen if you would like to go.
Sure. So every year we give our student representatives, usually about this time in March, an opportunity to fill out a survey to see if in fact their experience as a student representative on the Old Saybrook Board of Education, if their needs were met. And so there are some questions there that are designed for you to reflect honestly, and they're due in May. And we look forward to receiving your feedback, and they're usually presented, if I'm accurate, it's given to members of the Board of Education, and we can discuss it at a time that, you know, Jan puts that on the agenda. Is that accurate, Jan?
It is. They're due back to Mr. Gerber's May 24th.
Yeah.
And yes, and what it does is it helps us to know, you know, how successful the experience was, how it helped you grow. If you have any suggestions or thoughts for us, you know, really a general, all the typical exit interview questions. What did you learn from it? What did you like about it? What could be done differently? And we do use your input from year to year. So thank you in advance.
And I will say that most recently I met up with some board members who would like, from various cities and towns that don't do what we do in Old Saybrook, is that meet with our student reps once they're elected ahead of time of a board meeting, let them know their expectations, and, you know, getting sort of the board materials and how we encourage students to participate, you know, because sometimes it might feel a little bit overwhelming. And that's something that if you feel that that particular introduction was helpful, or ways that we could strengthen that, that would be helpful as well. And we're thrilled that you're on our board.
Awesome. Thanks, Eileen and Jan. So Matthew and McKenna, it's also 8:18. So I just want to let you guys know that if you'd like to be excused at 8:30, you can go ahead and drop at that time. But thank you guys for your participation, and I look forward to seeing your surveys and discussing it with you guys in the future.
And be honest with it. If there's something we can do to improve, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Eileen.
You're welcome.
All right, so we're going to circle back to our school start time update. This is a follow-up from the original presentation, and I'll hand it off to Jan and Joe.
Yeah, thank you. I'll just say a few introductory words. The Board of Education asked when the committee had completed their report that the committee come back with some answers, and we did present those one other time, but we didn't really get an opportunity to discuss them that night. And I know both Board Member Julius and Mr. Anastasio were key players in that committee, so I certainly won't try to convey what they learned through the process, but you have a number of pieces of data to review. And I think I would like to say, before I ask Joe and Karina to add their thoughts, is that the reason why I did not put a motion on this tonight, I know I had originally said we should probably be making this decision in March, is because I do think it's really important that we collect a little bit more information from the community at large and offer some opportunity for focus group discussion about this topic. That was always the intention. It's just that this has moved along, and of course, the year always gets away from us. And so perhaps this isn't an opportunity for 22-20, what are we going into? 22-23, yes. But, you know, I would like the board to continue to discuss this and possibly move on it before the end of the year, even if it's not for the next academic year. And with that, I'll ask Mr. A or Ms. Julius to step in.
Yeah, I think I would echo what Jan has said. I mean, the data that the committee stumbled upon and researched and debated over the course of 6 months, you know, in my gut of guts, as a high school administrator, teacher, parent, tells me there's some benefit in a later start time for our kids. But that's not without, you know, some challenges. However, we seem to be a district and a community of problem solvers and thinkers, and I'm wondering if those can be, you know, solved, or, you know, we can come up with creative solutions to make it work. Just anecdotally, my conversation with students about this, they could benefit. You know, I've talked to students with tardy issues, for instance, who, you know, would love an extra 15 minutes to a half hour. You know, we just came off the musical which was phenomenal, and our kids are still, I think, you know, feeling the effects of it. You know, so there is benefit, and there's a lot of research out there. And, you know, we've offered up some information for you to consider. Obviously, there's, you know, some other pieces to it in terms of staff. I did do a follow-up, as you requested, to find out if, you know, what the key issues were with that. And it was, you know, in terms of maybe getting their kids off the bus, or daycare concerns, or again, so there's got to be some discussion about that as well in terms of the overall impact. But, you know, in the end, it's about our kids. So so there's a lot. I don't envy you in your position, but there's a lot to weigh there. But the committee walked away, and Karina, feel free to jump in, with just a feeling that our kids could really benefit from a later start.
Yeah, I'll just follow up what Joe said. So, and Joe included some additional detail in the his school report. So I just kind of like to summarize that. Some of the additional work we did was to contact the schools that actually did move to a later start time, and what were some lessons learned, and what did they experience as a result of it. And each of the schools that I spoke with, their observations really supported the research. Fundamentally, they said that first period teachers noticed more engagement with their students. And they really did, they did experience fewer tardies. And they really saw the effects in the students. So that was very compelling for me. What was interesting to me was that the concerns in the other school districts were very similar to the concerns that we've heard voiced. Students waiting for the bus in the dark, and what about athletics? So what was interesting was, in one of the schools, the athletic director actually went and looked at the schedule and discovered there's only 5 times over the course of the year where athletic events would be affected by an early release. And so what appeared, you know, to be a big deal for parents really turned out not to be a big deal. And the other thing, so to a district, the issue that really drove start times for them was busing. And so, you know, what I shared with the schools that I spoke with was that we had M&J as a representative on our committee, and which was a great asset. And so, they, you know, I think we already reported that their recommendation was that in order to be, you know, to have middle school students not wait on the bus any longer than they need to, that, it, you know, they would recommend a 30-minute push to an 8 o'clock start time. So, so what was also interesting was that these other districts pushed their other school start times as well. So I know that in our consideration, we're just looking at the high school, and M&J is able to make it happen with just the high school having a delay. And then the other thing that was interesting is there's, and this is in some of the information that Joe shared. There's a parent in Guilford, and of course, Guilford has implemented a later start time. There's a parent in Guilford who is a sleep expert. He's a physician, pediatric physician who's a sleep expert. And several of the school districts, I think Brookfield most particularly, actually had him come in and meet with parents and make a presentation. And my understanding is, and Dr. Kondula spoke with him as well. So he's a very strong advocate for the benefits of having a delayed start time and the effects, the positive effects on kids that it has. But my understanding is that he's very willing to make presentations, to participate in whether it's a parent meeting that we think we want to recommend happen, or whether it's whomever. But I think that would be something for us to consider, is to have this individual come and maybe make a presentation at a parent meeting so that they could be better educated. So, and interestingly, none of the other districts that I spoke to, the concerns that we had heard voiced by our teachers, that those were not an issue in the other districts. So anyway, that's just sort of a summary of the additional information, that we got after the presentation. So if anybody has any questions or.
I would just add to, I think it's interesting that when we collected the school start times across the region, that 4 are earlier than us and 6 are later than us, and there are 4 that are exactly the same time. I do think that this is trending. I do think that people are really looking, really believing the research that's out there. I know I believe it, and as you know, that's why I did not put myself on the committee, because I would have come to the committee with a preconceived notion about what should happen for high school students. Having spent a lot of time teaching high school students, I can assure you that 7-something in the morning is rough for them, and that's just how their clocks tick. But one of the things that we do have to think about too is that the standard / daylight savings time controversy at the federal level may actually play a role in this and might make it easier to do one thing or another. And it seems like there'll be action taken on that relatively soon. And maybe that's one more piece of information that we will need before the board feels comfortable taking any kind of action. Thank you to the committee again.
George, I see that your hand is up. Go ahead.
Just a quick question. As the committee goes forward in terms of assessing the situation, environment, and so on, is there a dignity level that you guys are willing to accept? In other words, it's 8 o'clock or forget it, right? Or is 7:35 good enough, right? I mean, am I making sense? Is there any number, any delay?
Nico Kandulis pointed to research that showed that even a 15-minute delay is beneficial. And I kind of, as a parent educator for many years, I'm like, 15 minutes, really? But there is data out there to support that. Even a 15-minute delay, so say a 7:45 would do it. The problem then becomes the logistics. And that's where M&J came in. They said, well, if we do that, you're going to have kids waiting at the middle school, sitting on the buses till the doors open. So the 8 o'clock is actually better in terms of feasibility and transportation and having a well-oiled machine. And we know how difficult kind of getting into the middle school can be, in terms of the one way in, one way out. So we started thinking about the 8 o'clock versus the 7:45, mainly for that reason, because we're thinking of the kids. So
I think the other thing too, and I know, George, this was not your question, but one of the secondary reasons that this might be valuable to the district is it does allow us to share staff between the middle school and high school a little bit more easily. Bringing those start times closer together is going to be helpful logistically.
Eileen, I see your hand. Go ahead.
I was going to say, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. I was going to say, I don't think the question from my perspective, because this has been brought up years ago to the Old Saybrook Board of Education based on Navy research and all sorts of things, is no question it's beneficial. My question as a parent probably would be, so how is it going to impact a Goodwin school? How's it going to impact the middle school? So while, you can bring people in, but I don't think that the question is going to be that the research definitely trumps the fact that it will help high school students. But my question probably would be, well, then what happens exactly with the buses? What happens with sports? What happens with after school programming or before school? They do some sort of, I think music, for kids at the middle school. I think it's more logistical. That's to me what a parent might end up asking. What about this? What about that? And if there's a seemingly smooth transition for it all, I think it's a go. I think they're just going to have maybe those are the kind of questions that will need to be further maybe researched. And then when you come back, that might be something that's been addressed more specifically.
If I could.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Karina.
So Eileen, our proposal is that nothing happens with the start time of the middle school and elementary school. We're just looking at the high school at this point. And so that would be unchanged. And the other thing I would say, and Joe, please correct me if I'm mistaken, but our steering committee, our committee has really turned over our research to the board. Right. So I think, George, I think you made a comment, and Eileen, I don't want the board to think that we're continuing work on this at this point. This now is with the board.
Right.
And this is the opportunity.
Right. If I can jump in, Karina. So you're exactly right. So the committee, as far as I know, is you've completed the work, you've answered the questions we asked you, and the plan, and I saw Jane get up, but I'll try to fill time so she can correct me if I'm wrong. The plan is to have a meeting with the community at large, the parents and the community, to answer those questions, Eileen and George, and to put forth the plan so that we can hear their feedback as well, to your point, Eileen, to hear what parents' concerns are, to hear what the community's concerns might be. And then it's going to come back to the board after that presentation, and we're going to vote on it. So go ahead, Eileen.
Yeah, but wouldn't something like this be, before you bring it to the parents, wouldn't it make sense, and maybe it's already been done, that the high school administration has collectively spoken with the middle school administration, spoken to the Goodwin administration to see where there might be movement. Like if a question came up about the buses, where I was reading in some of those things that the middle school kids might have to wait on the bus, if the high school starts earlier. I think that's what Karina, might have said, but I'm just thinking that
was other people's concerns. Those were concerns of other schools that she's spoken to.
Right. And our committee and M&J already came back with, if you do X, if you do 15 minutes, they'll have to wait on the bus for X amount of time. If you do 30 minutes, there won't be a delay in the kids getting to school. So all that has already been researched and that was presented, I think, in the first presentation that was brought to the board.
So then if you're looking for the most maximum from this research to start high school earlier, you would go with the least impact on the other schools.
Right, which was 8 o'clock start time. That was what the recommendation from the committee is.
Right, and that's what I would be. So if that's the case, because Jan was like, it's not ready to come to us yet. They still have to do some further tweaking.
What I wanted to say was that I think it's really important that a change that is this significant, I know half an hour, right, doesn't seem terribly significant, but to some families who are on very tight schedules and it's like a house of cards, if one thing changes, I think we need to give them time, to grapple with the concept, to give some input. There may be something that we haven't thought about that's unique to Old Saybrook that needs to be shared with us. And, if the board decides that this is still the right move, that the data that the committee collected and the research, the medical research that has been done nationally and internationally on this topic is the most convincing argument, then I think at that point we can ask the board to vote on it. And so that might happen as early as, very late this year or very early next year. And in doing that, we give families an opportunity and staff an opportunity to make adjustments to their schedule. We give them a very long time to make adjustments to their schedule, a year or more. And I think that has been what I've heard from the committee, is that has been the biggest impediment to it. When all is said and done, all those fears about sports and buses, that all can be worked out, and has been. We've done that work already. The committee has done the work. What it comes down to is, how does it impact families and directly.
And I would say that, my recommendation would be if we could connect with the gentleman, I'm just drawing a blank on his name, from Guilford, if we wanted to invite him to a public, to a parent meeting. The other schools, what was very interesting to me is they focused not on so much of the change and the impact to families, but the health benefits for students. That was the tact that they took. And all parents were in agreement that was really what they wanted to move towards. And that helped them, I think, move beyond the, oh, this is an inconvenience for me. That really it's an investment in improved student health. So I'm an advocate for doing, this as soon as reasonable. That's just me. If I could offer my opinion and perspective, if there were a way for us to be able to have a parent meeting, bring it back to the board, be able to vote, and then for implementation in the fall, I think that'd be awesome. But I'm going to support whatever, we decide as a group.
Well, we certainly can reach out to the gentleman. I believe he's associated with Yale. Yes. And I watched the whole thing unfold in Guilford and how it was done there and the research that was done. Certainly we can reach out and see. It sounds like he'd be willing to come out. Maybe we can have Dr. Kondulis help us reach out to him.
Yeah.
Super. So maybe, Karina, I'll give you a jingle so I won't take some time because there might be some other questions that you might be able to answer, or Joe too.
Okay.
Thanks so much.
Other questions or comments? All right, great. Thank you guys so much. And Karina, thank you for your work on that. I know that you made a lot of phone calls, and although I'm very pleased that my fellow board chairs were so helpful and, willing to, share what they learned and everything. That was really great.
Yes, I very much appreciate you put out the request and they came running. So thank you so much for that.
That was awesome. Yeah, great. Thank you. And thank you, Joe. I appreciate your time on this too. All right, so moving on, the crew cooperative.
Yeah, this is just an update. So you voted to support this pending the terms of the MOA because we found out that Region 4 had not yet put it before their board. They have done that now, and they have voted to allow our crew team, which is a team of one right now, to participate with them on their boats at their practices with their coach. And the MOA is attached as a link. You can see that the dollar amounts have been put in, and we just wanted to make you aware of the details of the agreement and take any questions if you have them.
Great. Eileen, go ahead.
Just tell me again, Region 4 is?
Essex, Deep River, Chester, and that's Valley Regional High School.
Thanks, Jan.
You're welcome.
Other questions? Awesome. Thanks for the update, Jan, and I'm glad to hear that's moving forward.
Yes.
All right. So moving into our reports by administration, we'll start off with Goodwin. Heston, any color commentary before I turn it over for questions? I'm going to take that as a no, Heston. You're probably on double mute and don't realize it. That's where I spend most of my time on my work calls. Double mute. Secret mute.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay. No, I have nothing to highlight especially, but I'll answer any questions you have.
Great. Any questions for Heston? Anyone? Eileen, go ahead.
Yep. I thought it was a great report. I just have questions because I, of course, don't have anybody at Goodwin School anymore. But I think like the reading initiative, it said students participated in a fun week with free books. So did somebody donate books?
So each year we have the celebration of reading and all the families donate books. And we have enough books donated that each year students can go and do a little shopping and take books of high interest and take them home.
How terrific is that? And what's the happiness hut?
So our theme was social emotional learning and centered around things that make us happy. So in our foyer, we built a hut that kids can come and visit. There's enough seating to fit a whole classroom. So classrooms come down, they sit in the happiness hut and they do their reading. Also, all the students were able to fill out forms of things in their life that made them happy. And we stuck them all over the happiness hut to decorate it.
Very cool. And just lastly, what is the passport form for English language learners?
So when we onboard families and students, there's an interview process and we collect lots of information. But we found that we needed more details about our English language learners. So we added some additional sections that would help teachers have a better feel and understanding about the student as well as the family. So we're calling it a passport, and it's going to be used for all students, but it is tailored toward learning more about English language families.
Thanks.
Thanks, Eileen.
You're welcome.
Any other questions for Heston? Great. Thanks for your report, Heston, and thanks for joining us.
You're welcome.
Next up is middle school, Krista. Krista, you look like our mystery caller tonight.
I know. I don't know, Mike. I'm so backlit that you can't see my face.
I like it though. It's interesting.
You have to change her voice though.
You're going to be able to identify me, I think, especially with my name on the screen.
You need the blue dot, Krista, the blue dot.
Oh boy. I don't think that there's anything particularly in the report that I also feel that I need to highlight, but I do want to say thank you to our PTO. I've put this out there a lot of places. This is the first year we've been able to do some of our end of year events, and we are working on planning a lot of those. And I definitely want to thank the small group of folks that are part of our PTO this year that have been contributing to that. And anybody who might be watching this, I hope that we'll have some additional volunteers to help with some really cool events for the kids for the end of the school year.
That's awesome. That's awesome. George, I saw your hand up. Go ahead.
Just a quick question. So the share table, that was an interesting idea. And so I'm sure you guys are very thought about this and very considerate of this, but how do you guys manage the social stigma of the share table so that, you know, people go up is just because they're more hungry versus they're actually hungry?
Yes. So actually, that's a really good question. And Heather Tooker, who is the culinary teacher, is the one who's organized this. And they talked as a class about what some of those issues might be and that might be one of the issues. So there's been a lot of discussion with many of the kids that have been involved with it. They've done presentations on morning news explaining what it is, that it's not about, you know, somebody not having a lunch. It's really more about if you're still hungry or if you need an extra snack during the day. And I think it's been pretty successful in providing kids with a little extra food if they needed something or they just wanted something extra. So I think overall it's gone pretty well and that stigma hasn't been attached to it. But there's been a lot of conversation with the classes that are doing that, are participating.
That's great. Thanks, George. Thanks, Krista. Eileen, go ahead. I see your hand up.
I was going to just comment about the share table too. I think it's interesting because in terms of taking a look at reducing waste, how many students bring their lunch and then they throw stuff out because their parents have packed it and they don't really want it. So this is a way of them kind of inconspicuously giving it up to the share table. The parents might not know that they're not, you know, eating it, but at least it's not getting thrown out.
Yeah, and there's a lot of rules and regulations to it. Heather Tooker, who actually set this up, had to go and do a lot of research to make sure that it was meeting all of the protocols that have been set. She's worked with our cafeteria staff to make sure that we've met all of those as well. But I think it's been a very successful start. And I would say, you know, not all the food gets taken, but a lot of it does. So it's been a successful idea that she's had, and the kids are very invested in it who have been participating and helping with it.
I think it sounds lovely, and it really generates a whole sense of kindness and generosity without, you know, having your old-fashioned stigma place. It's just like, you know what, there are things that we just might make available because people might want something.
Yeah.
And that's a lovely thing to have at the middle school. So congratulations on that. I had a chance just to sit for about 20 minutes on that internet safety presented by Youth and Family. Honest to God, when I looked at it, I was like, are you kidding me? I was like, I'm not that tech, but for all these kids that are tech, there are so many. The presenter was excellent. And he, was talking a lot about the pitfalls of things that people don't even know. Like if you take a picture and they can follow where that picture's been taken and where you took it and where you are. And I just think that it was terrific. And I'm curious to know, when it was communicated with children at the middle school or students, what their responses were, like were their feedback like, wow, or it made me change how I even look at my phone anymore. Or so I was curious on what you might have gotten as a reflection.
That's actually a really good question. It was interesting watching some of their faces, particularly some of the students who I know have maybe not made best choices with technology.
Yeah.
So I think it definitely had an impact, but I would say one of the things that stood out to me was we had a student who came to me after the presentation, concerned about something that he saw about another student that he didn't necessarily always get along with, but was concerned that it was there, had nothing to do with that child personally. But after the presentation felt like it was important for me to know about it. So I definitely think it got them beginning to think about that, and thinking a little bit more, just to take that extra couple seconds before they hit send, before they hit post, before they like something, to think for just that extra second or two, which is a message that we've been promoting. But I think hearing it from somebody else, somebody who's an expert in that field, really hopefully will make an impact given the technology that's in the kids' hands, because they don't always have the social skill set to navigate all of the things that are happening online when they're sitting in their bedrooms.
And the other piece, and maybe Joe can add into this one, and thanks for being so patient with my questions, are that, many years ago, you could just share something with a friend. But now, again, you're more expert than I am, these things can go viral and they can, increase bullying and so many factors related to instability of socially and emotionally. And I wondered if that was even addressed, or if the high school talks about it, or this gentleman's going to the high school. I just think it's a very tenuous time, and it's only going to get worse. And if kids aren't responsible, it just creates a lot of emotional issues in schools.
And there is research that shows that students, especially female students in the adolescent age group, 7th and 8th grade particularly, can be greatly affected by social media, not just social bullying, but comparing themselves to others, thinking that they need to live up to these photos that are often photoshopped.
Right.
The footprint they leave behind by putting things out there that might be found, 10 years later. So yes, I think it's definitely an area that we need to continue to have those conversations with the students on. And we've had some of those with the students. I have done that myself. I know our school resource officer has gone with me and provided feedback on some of those things. But I think that, again, hearing from somebody from the outside who is an expert in that area was a good influence on their decision making.
Wow. Joe, have any ideas at the high school?
Yeah, I think it's incorporated in our health curriculum. And when Sheila and I have our class meetings, though, because of COVID, we haven't been able to get them all in one space. We do touch on it. And it's that balance of teaching kids the responsibility of technology, and thinking before you press send or post, being kind to each other, and that respect extends out. Now it extends out globally. Like you said, something can go viral, within a minute. So just making them aware, because adolescents tend to have that, little bubble around them that it's all about me at times. So getting them to think, more about others. And I have to say that that's where restorative practices, the fact that the district has embraced that, and we've been championing that at all the buildings, to get kids to sit down and face each other when there are issues, has had much more impact, a positive impact, than traditional methods in the past. So every moment is a teachable moment. So
any feedback from Youth and Family, if the families of Old Saybrook High families participated in what they thought about it, Krista?
I don't think that it was a terribly large group. I think she had told me that there was, I believe, around 30 parents that participated. So, but I didn't get any specific feedback.
Yeah, that might be
from
helpful
the
too.
parent side. Yep.
You don't know.
No, I would love to. I wish all parents got an opportunity to see that, because I think the information in there is very valuable. And like you said, you might not realize all of the different things, and it's constantly changing. It's hard to keep up with.
Thanks so much. I so appreciate your sharing. Thank you.
Thanks, Eileen. And Krista. One of my favorite topics. If you ever want me to ruin dinner, invite me over and ask me about cybersecurity. Happy to do it. All right, so Joe, you're next up. Any color commentary before I turn it over for questions about your report?
I didn't include it because it's after the fact, but the musical, hopefully you were able to view it in some form or another. It was, my wife's son and I were there Saturday night, and my God, it was magical. I just having people in the auditorium, the audience was so into it. And Sheila and I met with the kids just to congratulate them, and Maria and Jeremy Milton and Jeremy Taylor, because he was in the pit, and Laura Carruthers. Just the joy, and seeing that joy emanate from the kids, you could tell that they were so into it and so enjoying it. And even the pit, you'd look over at the pit and they were smiling, and we haven't had that in a couple of years. And it was just magical to be able to have people in there. And I know that the music department spent a lot of time with COVID protocols. They've been meticulous in that, in terms of planning and keeping everyone safe, but finding that balance of some normalcy and giving that kids that experience. It was just a proud moment as an administrator and just a member of the community. It was wonderful. So I hope you all got to share in that.
Fantastic. Karen, I see your hand is up. Go ahead.
Yeah, Joe, just, I brought my granddaughters Friday night to see the show. It felt amazing to get back in that auditorium, see it live. The cast was clearly having a blast. Just please let them know that they did a great job, and it was just wonderful to feel normal again. So thank them all.
Will do.
Eileen, go ahead.
I was going to say I was here Friday night, and what I absolutely adored as well. First of all, at the end, they recognized people that work behind the scene.
Yes.
And that's something that's essential, because without those individuals and who created the backdrops, hand painted them with Sarah Manga and all the art department, talk about an inclusive and collaborative way of recognizing individual learning styles. Every one of those people that worked on the set, came out, so that you're really celebrating everyone. It wasn't those the ones that were dressed in black stayed behind. They came right out there. And that demonstrates a lot, and self-esteem building for them was spectacular. I also smiled, and I thought that I'm sure it happened each night, but the night I was there, when Jan kind of got on stage at the end, which was a surprise, and maybe you did it on Saturday night, but a huge collaboration for them that, like, you know what, grown-ups can have a really good time with us too.
Yep.
Terrific.
Thanks, Eileen. Trevor, go ahead. Trevor?
Oh, sorry. I saw Lean's hand too. We saw it on Friday night. We saw the live stream, and I just wanted to. I know Matthew spoke about it, that he was zooming in and out. We had 3 different cameras. That was the best live stream I've ever seen. It's such a wonderful job, and as we watched it, it was very clear, and the kids had a blast. It looked like they had an absolute blast. So it was a fabulous show. So just wanted to say that.
Yeah, I've nicknamed Matthew now, Matthew Ken Burns Johnson. So he doesn't have to live up to it, but he already is. He already is. So he's almost transcended Ken Burns. So he's a remarkable individual. Yeah, he enjoys that. And my God, because we were kind of seated behind him, and he had it up, and it was like, ESPN Central, it was crazy. So he's a master already. So
fantastic. Awesome. Well, thank you, Trevor, and thank you, Joe. All right, moving on to Dr. Goss. Any color commentary, Amity, before I turn it over for questions?
I just want to highlight the professional learning that's going on before summer enrichment. So summer enrichment is going to be super exciting, but there's a whole lot of professional learning that happens before that. And the teachers have been unbelievably amazing. Last week when we met for a quick session, they did in about 30 minutes what it took us 2 sessions to do the last time, because there's just such energy and enthusiasm, and there's been such dedication to experiential learning throughout the year. So it's super exciting. They're going through a ton of training, and they are excited to share some amazing courses with kids this summer. So if you know kids in the system, if you are related to kids in the system, please tell them summer enrichment is going to be a ton of fun this year.
Awesome. Thanks, Amity. Karen, I see your hand is up. Go ahead.
I just wanted to say just a quick comment to Amity. Your report really captured the benefits of online learning experiences for both student instruction and professional learning. So thank you for that narrative. It was really, really well done.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks, Karen. George, your hand is up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just back to the same paragraph you wrote about the summer enrichment program. I just want to maybe clarify something, or maybe just try to understand something, right? So based on that paragraph, I got the sense that right now the program is very much dependent on federal grants. And I just want to make the comment that if the program is successful and the district wants to continue and the federal grants do not continue, that certainly consider putting on the budget, right? I mean, and have the board basically consider this as a part of what's necessary to basically run the school and improve it and so on. So that if this is a successful program, you don't want to stop, don't make it stop because the federal grant ends.
Thank you. I appreciate that support, and I appreciate you noticing that, because you're right. It is currently very much based on the federal grants that we have. And if we do want to continue it, it will be something that we'll have to embed in the budget in coming years. So thank you for noticing. And yes, I'd love to come to you with some evidence to support the positive things that I think that we're seeing in classrooms in the future.
Thanks, George. Eileen, go ahead.
Just a quick question. So on the ongoing, and hi, Amity, on the ongoing and upcoming in curriculum instruction and assessment, you mentioned the open way learning on-site visit with student focus groups. So will that be all students will be in focus groups at the high school, and what would the topics necessarily be? Maybe showing how the change in teaching, have they really noticed a difference? I'm not sure, but I would, defer to your.
So it's part of sort of gathering some of that street data that we talked about when I did the assessment presentation, really hearing students' voices. We want to make sure that students have experienced some of this kind of sort of teaching and learning. So the way that we'll do it at the high school is we actually identified a study hall where every student in the study hall has been in at least one class that has embedded experiential learning. So we will go into that study hall and offer students the opportunity to be part of a focus group. They will volunteer or not, and then we'll go into another room and do that focus group with them. And then there is a specific class, a 4th grade class at Goodwin School, where we will visit the classroom and sort of co-facilitate with the teacher. And then at the middle school, the 7th grade, during their X block time, we will reach out to a randomly selected group of students because we know that the entire 7th grade has had some experiential learning practice. And we will ask again for a sort of a random sampling of students, and they'll only participate if they want to. So it'll be voluntary.
And then will you circle back with their feedback?
Yes, absolutely. I'm excited to be able to compile that feedback. It's actually something that OpenWay might do for us, is compile all of that and feed it back to us.
That would be exciting, because at the end of the day, that's what you really want.
Yes.
And also how the teachers are doing with that. Maybe that's for another conversation, the process of changing the way that they're teaching and how they're finding some of the challenges, or where they find they may need further professional development, or maybe partnering with a teacher that is able to integrate this type of teaching in an easier fashion than someone else.
Yes, yeah, they actually, the group that worked last year made their professional goal for this year to be mentoring others. So they reached out to colleagues and they said, what can we do to support you? And many teachers at each of the schools made that their professional goal this year, to work with somebody who was already sort of trained in this, to shift from being dependent on the OpenWay folks to sort of having our own group of people who can train others. And that's actually something that they're doing right now. Many of those people from last summer are participating again in the trainings as co-trainers. and sort of also watching at the same time. So they're apprenticing with the Open Way folks so that they will be able to deliver that training in the future.
Terrific. Thanks again. Thanks again for this initiative. It's really exciting.
It is. It's pretty cool.
Thanks, Amity.
Thank you.
Moving on to Julie's report. Julie, do you have any comments before I turn it over to the board for questions?
I do not. I think it's pretty self-explanatory, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
I think so too. Any questions for Julie about her report? Oh, good job, Julie. Nice. And Kathy, any comments for the board before I turn it over for questions?
Oh, the same here. I don't have anything to highlight, but happy to answer anything.
Good to see you. Any questions for Kathy? No, awesome. Thank you for coming tonight, Kathy. And last up, Jan's report. Jan, any color commentary before I turn it over to the board for questions?
No, nothing at all.
No. Any specific questions for Jan? Up, I see George, your hand is up. Go ahead.
So Jan, I was just curious about the population, student population number, right? So I think you're comparing March of last year versus March of this year. So I can actually find it. I think you went from 1090 to 1,100, a plus of 20, and So in the budget book, right? For the fiscal year 2022, the total number of students at that time was 1090 already, and so I'm just trying to figure out, did we pick this 22 people up since last fall?
Yes, we did. So this is March over March. So I'm comparing 1 year, same month in each of the years, and so we've given you average daily enrollment in the budget document, and we've given you October 1 to October 1, which is our official count time for the state. And now I'm giving you March to March, just as an update. And I think one of the things that you may pick up here is the story is we see an increase March of 21 to March of 22, which was not anticipated, but that's similar to the other months. And B, we watch our numbers increase and decrease every year. So I anticipate that number will go back down before the end of the academic year, as it has in past years, and then it will increase again throughout the fall and winter next year. That's the cycle of our academic enrollment. But the real punchline, the bottom line, is the fact that our numbers did not decrease the way they were anticipated to, in part because of our expansion of our ECP program, and in part because of new move-ins.
Okay, great. Thank you. Karina, I see your hand up.
Thank you. I just am curious, of course, about the budget and the finance. You know, you guys have been so diligent about attending the meetings in the hopes that you're able to address any questions that the board might have. Do you have a sense of, like, what are they looking for, or how long this may go on before? Is there a date set for a referendum, or, you know, what are the next steps, I guess?
So it's actually in our charter when our referendum, when our meeting is and when our referendum is, and you know, it doesn't give a date, but it says the second, I think it's Tuesday or Wednesday in May is the referendum. So that really is pretty much predetermined. But as far as when the Board of Finance is going to act on our budget, that has not been clear to us this year. So obviously we've been attending all Board of Finance meetings just to be on top of things. I do get the sense, though, I mean, I actually reached out and made a phone call and said, when can we expect action? And I do get the sense that it probably will happen this coming Tuesday. I haven't seen the agenda yet, but when we do get the agenda, we'll make sure the Board of Education gets it as well.
Okay. And do you have a sense of how they're viewing the budget? Do you think that they are looking to take it as is, or?
So I don't have a sense of how they're viewing our budget. No, I mean, was participating, as I know a number of you were too, in the Board of Finance meeting this past week, and there was talk about off-budget accounts in other departments. There was talk about adding or subtracting dollars based on specific initiatives, which I think was stopped at the Board of Finance meeting because obviously the Board of Finance, that's beyond their scope. So that's the only indication I have of where they're focusing right now.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for Jan? Awesome. Thanks, Jan. So at this point, the administrators can feel free to drop, with the exception of Jan. Unfortunately, Jan, you got to stick with us for the last part.
To the bitter end.
Yeah, to the bitter end. But the other administrators, thank you guys so much for your time tonight and for joining us and for your excellent reports as always. So thank you for your participation.
Thank you. Good night.
Thanks.
Thank you. Good night, everybody.
Bye.
All right, so moving right along through our reports by board committees. George, any color commentary about budget and fiscal?
No, I think Janet just summarized it, and based on Karina's question, right? That the last the last Board of Finance meeting, they basically postponed any decisions they're going to make on the budget cuts, whatever, or decisions until this next coming meeting, which I think is the very last one before the referendum. And so, but I think exactly what Jan wrote in her report, right? It's very time consuming for the people to just keep showing up for these meetings every 2 weeks, right? It's just, these times don't come free. So we'll see what happens. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, George. I think they actually did say directly that they were planning on voting on it on the 29th, if I remember correctly. But that was like the billionth hour I was up that day, so I could have heard wrong. All right. Eileen, anything to report from CABE?
Yes, actually, I attended a retreat that they have every year. And this year they actually presented a strategic plan. I always think of Jan as being the one who really brought about the strategic plan how many years ago? But either way, it was a really wonderful meeting, very collegial, innovative and honest. And some of the things they've come up with is to begin to think about how to ensure diversity on boards of education. And that's really something that, they're going to try to work on as best as they can. We've tried as well in Old Saybrook, but it's just hard,
It's the political committee's job. Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, and transportation. Also to strengthen a positive perspective of the public, the media, and legislators on the essential nature and work of school boards. And then in general, broadening the knowledge and the responsibilities of boards of education across the state. So there are a lot of things that people don't really know about school boards, and so they're going to try to push some of those initiatives out in addition to several others. But it was terrific, wonderful input, and I will keep you posted.
Thanks, Eileen. Alan is not with us tonight, so we'll skip over facilities. I was unable to make the last Learn meeting, which was, I don't even remember when it was, honestly. It was like a week ago, I think. This month's been a blur. But, I think, Trevor, I'll probably be talking to you to see if you're interested in representing us on that board. Because I definitely think you, if you're interested, I don't have a lot to add to it, but I would love to have you represent us. It's, there's a lot of interesting things going on, and I just don't have the time to be on all those calls. So thank you. Strategic planning, Karen, anything?
No report on that.
Awesome. I have nothing to report on demographics. I'll just leave it at that. Personnel, Karen, anything?
Yes. May 10th is the next date in our timeline for evaluating the superintendent, and that's when Jan will present her year in review, and we'll have a Q&A session going on. So it's an important meeting for everybody to attend. And can we do that one in person?
Yep, that one will be in person.
It'll be in person.
Mm-hmm.
That would be great.
And dinner provided, of course.
Awesome.
I'm sorry?
And dinner provided, of course.
Well, no, not typically, no. Bring your own snacks. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Karen. Eileen, anything new on policy?
Nothing urgent. Jen and I are going to be meeting sometime, and then we will host a policy committee, meeting based on that meeting. So Nothing especially urgent. We've been rocking and rolling, so we're getting a little reprieve.
Excellent. And I have nothing to report, nothing special to report since our last meeting. I feel like that was my whole year report in that last meeting. So just a couple of reminders, I think that are important. The special Board of Finance meeting that we were just talking about, it's on the 29th. They'll have another one on the 5th before our next board meeting. And then our next board meeting is April 5th at 7 o'clock online. So with that, I would look for a motion.
Make a motion to adjourn.
Thank you, Steve. Do we have a second for that?
Second.
A second for Karen. No discussion? Any discussion? All in favor?
Hold on, Karen.
Everybody is home. Go home.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks for giving me. See, I can be taught, Steve. Good night, everyone.
Stay healthy.
Good night. Thank you.
Is Trent still about?
Yes, it's in the other room.
Okay. Catching some Z's, huh?